They say a house remembers the hands that keep it upright. The mansion on the hill remembered every hand except hers. The road up to the Rothwell estate climbed in a slow, expensive curve, bordered by cypress that were groomed like soldiers along a private parade. From the outside, the place looked airbrushed into reality, stone-warmed honey gold by a late sun, glass that collected the sky and returned it cleaner, sharper, richer than when it arrived. Inside, the air had a temperature you could predict like the stock market. The lighting came in from hidden seams, carefully moderated so you never saw a bulb. The silence was a decal on every surface. And yet even silence can have a noise here. It hummed with the certainty that money makes when it assumes it will be obeyed. She was the first to arrive most mornings and the last to leave most nights, though she did not go far. Her name in the household ledger was Naomi Alves, Naomi for short in speech, Ms. Alves in emails, the nanny in the mouths that mattered. She moved the way only the indispensable move. Quietly, fast enough to solve what was about to spill, slow enough not to be seen solve it. A navy uniform, a pair of yellow gloves tucked into the half-apron at her hip, hair in a low bun she twisted without a mirror. There are uniforms that erase you and uniforms that protect you. Hers did a little of both. On that morning the city had threatened rain, but delivered clarity instead. The children were late to wake, late to brush, late to anything that required a closed mouth and still hands. Henry, the tallest by exactly the inch he bragged about, grew bored of cereal and turned his boredom into a game where spoons were catapults. Their father, in charcoal suit, watched that cost as much as a used car, and ticked like an argument read the news on a tablet that kept refreshing with unpleasantness. Their mother mirrored lenses on the top of her head. White silk blouse too perfect for the hour scrolled a phone with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Naomi," Mrs. Rothwell said, not looking up. "There's yogurt on the floor." Naomi was already there with a cloth, catching the milk-bright crescent before the soles that never watched the ground could stamp it into the grout. "I've got it," she said, not softly, no one heard softness, just low, like a promise she made to the tile. She rinsed, wrung, wiped again. The stain dwindled. The children resumed their catapults until their father's gaze cut across the table like a laser level, and their hands settled against the wood. Silence returned as though it never left. "Henry," Naomi said after a beat, "you still have time to make the bus if you put the game away now." "It's not a game," Henry said. "It's physics." "Then the bus leaves precisely on time," she said, "and physics predicts you should be on it." It won her a grin the sideways, reluctant kind you don't show your father. It also won her a look from Mrs. Rothwell that said, "Stay in your lane." Lanes are interesting things. You can follow them and never arrive anywhere you meant to be. You can step outside them for one breath, and suddenly I assumes you plan to take the whole road. For the first 3 minutes of our time together, I want to ask you to stay with Naomi, really with her. If stories like this move you, subscribe. Now more hidden truths are coming, more rooms like this where someone who was never meant to be seen becomes the person who saves the day. And tell us in the comments, what should Naomi discover next in this house? A hidden letter in a book no one opens? A forbidden love behind an unlocked door? A secret child whose name was removed from the will? Your idea might shape the next chapter in this world. The bus did, in fact, arrive on time. The driver looked like he'd been told to smile in a training once and never again. The children went down the front steps with the choreography of reluctant royalty, moving as if the air belonged to them, and would move out of the way. Naomi checked backpacks for the math workbook that always fled at the last minute, found it under the cushion where lost things formed a colony, and slid it in with a care that looked like resignation but wasn't. The door closed. The house inhaled and exhaled her alone. You learn a building by its aches. The Rothwell estate had a wrist that sometimes clicked the door to the winter terrace, A knee that stiffened in rain, the pantry floorboards, original to the bones, which complained in single plank. A distant heartbeat in the walls, the server closet that kept everything humming in locked racks, its own climate and language. Naomi's route moved through aches and past them, from kitchen to laundry to a place she never entered and always noticed, the private room. The private room was at the end of a hall that had a second door within it, hidden in the paneling like a magician's apology. Sometimes the door stood open, sometimes it did not. When it did, you saw only the first 3 feet. A bookcase, a slice of carpet that didn't match the rest of the house because it refused to, the base of a brass lamp shaped like a column. The rest was rumor. Contracts were signed there that changed the temperature of other buildings, other cities. Portraits hung on its walls that were insured for numbers you didn't say out loud. People who entered did not bring their phones. They brought whatever face the next hour required. The staff did not clean it when its owner was gone. A firm came twice a week in unmarked vans with white gloves and long lists. Even dust deserves discretion, the butler had once told Naomi when she accidentally reached for the closet that held the special cloths. He had the kind voice of someone who had lasted here 20 years by remembering what he would rather forget. If Mr. Rothwell wants something tidied, he leaves a note. Otherwise, the room remains as it is. We honor the boundary. Boundaries were easy for Naomi to honor when they were lines painted on a floor. Harder when they were lines through a life. She kept her phone in a drawer, calls to her mother scheduled like medicine so time zones didn't bruise kindness. Her mother's voice was the one place Naomi allowed herself to be unguarded English warmed by a Bahia childhood and 30 years of diaspora. Você como, filha? Did you eat? Você descanso? Did you rest? Naomi always said yes. Sometimes it was true. At lunch, she ate at the little table near the back entrance reserved for staff, a piece of marble salvage from a bathroom remodel long before she arrived, polished and made humble by the height of its base. The chef left her a plate with a note when there were leftovers that would never be called leftovers in this zip code. For Naomi, written in pencil that smudged if you touched it with a finger. He was a man who liked his knives more than conversation, but he liked that she loved his soup. In the afternoon, she returned shirts to closets where shirts went to multiply, checked underbeds for planets of dust that spun only for children, reset the world to the state it would pretend was effortless at 5. She moved like a person trained by small-room subway apartments with ovens that heated unevenly, kitchens where the table was the only counter, mornings when you folded your blanket and became the couch again. Rich houses give the illusion of space, but they also ask you to make yourself smaller, to tuck yourself into the seam of a door when someone needs to pass who does not know how to turn their shoulders. Humiliation here did not announce itself with insults. It wore perfume. It smiled with only the top half of its face. It said, "Oh, good, you're here," without learning your last name. It asked where you were from, and then corrected your answer. At dinner parties, it handed you a jacket without looking to see whether you already held plates in both hands. "She's marvelous with the boys," one guest told another. In front of her, like she was weather that had cooperated. "We had someone like that once." "What was her name?" The other guest shrugged. "Something sweet." In the evenings, Mr. Rothwell liked to walk through the house with a glass of something the color of stained wood, checking it the way men check fences, not because the fence is likely to break, but because brokenness feels like a personal insult to men who buy fences taller than the law encourages. He was younger than his suits pretended, but his confidence aged him. The children loved him the way you love a story you only get to hear on Sundays. He loved them like a man who had never learned to be loved any other way, suddenly, completely, with a price he paid in calendars later. On Tuesdays, the wife, Clara, hosted a charity committee. It wasn't charity the way Naomi knew it, with ladies in plastic chairs falling asleep after a night shift and then waking to serve food to people who looked like their cousins. This was charity with seating charts. The women arrived in cars that folded their doors up like wings. They brought handbags that would not admit to holding anything as ordinary as a wallet. They spoke of giving the way people speak of lending books they never expect to see again, with affection insulated by certainty. One of those Tuesdays, Naomi stood by the kitchen island replenishing a tray of lemon water and mint leaves when she heard it. A laugh that was the gold version of a laugh, polished at a dentist, shaped by orthodontia into a sound that did not occur in nature. She didn't need to look to know the laugh belonged to a woman who would notice if the napkins were one shade off from the table runner, and then mention it with a sorrow meant for tragedies. "Is that her?" the woman said, not lowering her voice much. "The nanny." "The nanny," Clara confirmed. She pulled a face that wasn't quite a face, the kind she wore when she wanted it known she tolerated something. "She's efficient. And the boys are well, they are boys." "Of course," the guest said. "And so hard to find good help right now. Everyone is so political." She reached for a lemon wedge and dropped it not into her water, but onto the marble where it left a brief, bright oval. She did not notice. Naomi did. Lemon lifts stain. It can also make one if no one bothers to wipe it. Later, after the women left to go decide the fate of music programs and the town's perception of their names, Naomi found herself in the children's playroom getting Legos to agree with gravity. Henry had built a spaceship and then decided the spaceship had to survive an earthquake. She had learned the trick of entering a boy's world without taking his tools out of his hand. Ask what the ship is trying to do, not what it is. Ask where it wants to go, not why it hasn't arrived. He told her about Mars and a docking bay, and a piece that only came in one set he lost a year ago. "Things come back," she said. "Not always," he said, honest the way children are honest before it is trained out of them. "No," she said, "not always. But sometimes not as a delay, not a verdict." He looked at her like he understood, and then didn't because he was 8. She smoothed the hair at his temple. He pretended to hate it and didn't. The house had an evening sound the way cities do, a change in a light that made voices lower, a door that answered the wind, a humming the refrigerator made when it decided to. Naomi moved through it, setting the day down. She could have left then. Her hours were the kind you could have written down if someone had wanted to, and no one had wanted to. But she lingered, a habit from her first weeks here, when she believed if she left too fast, the house would forget she existed, and the job would dissolve like mist. So she stayed an extra hour to fold towels, still warm from the dryer, and to walk past the private room, once, twice, not as an intruder, never that, but as a person checking to see that a C remains where a C should be. The note appeared on a Thursday. Not on her pillow, that would have been dramatic. Not in her inbox, which would have been impersonal. On the island, in a little acrylic holder, where the household posted events, deliveries, repairs, the time the piano tuner would arrive to tell them what they already knew, that the piano was almost but not exactly in concert with itself. The note was written in Mr. Rothwell's hand. You knew his hand by its urgency. It had a forward lean, as if the sentence were trying to beat you to where it was going. Private room. Light dust on desk only. No shelves. No drawers. Before 5 p.m. The butler saw her see it and nodded a slow permission that surprised her more than the note. "Only what it says," he murmured. "No more." Naomi folded the slip and slid it into the pocket of her apron, as if it might leave unless she kept it close. There are spaces in a life where your name never appears, and then one day it does. Most people will not notice the difference. The person whose name arrives will feel the air change. She did not go immediately. That would have made the moment a mountain. She cleaned 2 bathrooms and a hallway as if the tile were listening. She took a phone call from her mother on a headset while the dryer spun, discussing a cousin's engagement and whether the family would be able to travel for it. She said she would try. She asked how the garden was. "A rose has opened," her mother said, making the sentence sound like a small church bell. Naomi smiled at the shelf of folded towels. At 4:15, she stood outside the private room and waited for the door to understand that she had been invited. The door did not change. It did not owe her a sign. She straightened the bun that had loosened itself without asking her hair is honest like that. She knocked once though no one was inside, because respect must be performed as well as felt, and then she entered. Rooms create their own weather. The private room was cooler than the rest of the house, without being unfriendly. The light was lower. The shelves climbed 3 walls in a rush of leather and linen spines. The carpet was Persian without having to say so. It taught your foot to land with consideration. On the desk a slab of wood that had been a tree for a long time, and then a table for longer sat a single paperweight you couldn't quite see through, and a tray of pens that had numbers instead of names. There was a bowl where a person might put keys if a person like that walked around holding keys. On the corner of the desk, the dust. Not dust the way kitchens know it, but a film thin enough to make its presence feel like an act of intimacy. She lifted the cloth like a curtain and drew it across the wood in a straight line, as if she were ironing a runway onto the surface. 15 minutes became 12. She took a second pass and checked from 2 angles daylight from the window, ceiling light reflected like a pale coin. It gleamed. She put the cloth away and paused as one pauses when leaving a church, not because you believe in the church, but because you respect belief. Then she left. The door closed with that soft, expensive sigh. That night a car arrived that was not one of theirs. It announced itself not by sound the quietest cars sometimes hold the loudest people, but by the way the staff saw their own reflections in its paint. A man stepped out in a garment that could be a suit anywhere, but was not local to this life, the lapels softer, the fabric with a sheen that suggested it had been woven for someone whose name mattered. He wore a ring that was not shy about being a ring. He was, Naomi would learn within the hour, a sheikh whose business with Mr. Rothwell was both urgent and old, 2 qualities that often share a drink even when they dislike each other. He arrived early. The millionaire was late. The staff knew before anyone told them. Urgent men check their watches, and late men text apologies that sound like weather reports. The butler, who understood diplomacy better than most ambassadors, escorted the sheikh to the library. Then, at a word from the guest in a voice smooth as oiled stone, to the private room. "Mr. Rothwell will be with you shortly," the butler said at the door. The sheikh smiled a small, private smile, as if he had been promised the ending to a story everyone else believed was still being written. When the door closed, the sound was almost exactly the sound it made, for Naomi. Difference is often mostly in the listener. Naomi was in the hallway with a silver tray lined in linen and 2 glasses that sang when you looked at them. She had been asked to bring a particular bottle, the one kept on the top shelf, not because it was best, but because it liked to look down. She knocked and waited. "Enter," the sheikh said, and the word rolled with the weight of deserts and airports and rooms where men agree to things they shouldn't. She stepped in and kept her eyes where eyes belong when they are not invited to look. She set the tray down. He thanked her in English that carried a second music under it, consonants balanced on the edge of something older than vowels. When she left, she did not know she had already crossed the first line of the night. It is like that with lines. You don't feel them until you turn around. The house settled into early evening. Light gathered itself on the floor near the long windows like guests reluctant to leave. The boys were at their tutoring. Clara was at her mirror, preparing to go somewhere where mirrors approved of her. Mr. Rothwell was in a vehicle that moved through traffic the way a name moves through a room people are paid to keep private. Naomi checked the list by the island and saw it again, the private room, 4:30, dust only. She looked at the clock. It was 6. She didn't plan to pass the door again. She just happened to. The carpet held sound the way velvet holds fingerprints. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard it, a single word the door did not contain, "Naam." Yes. The Arabic came like a breeze from a country she had only visited in books, then lived in for years in the quiet room of her own study. She did not have anyone to speak it with. It had been a secret she kept not because it was dangerous, but because it was hers the way some people keep poems in a wallet under the receipts. She knew that word not as a tourist knows it, but as a student who learned its cousins. Naam for yes, la for no. I was somewhere in between depending on who you are in the sentence. The man on the phone said more, his voice catching on the smile of letters. Transfer, schedule, signature, fool. She didn't mean to listen. She stopped because stopping was safer than moving, then found that stillness has its own betrayal. Words travel. Even when a door is closed, a vowel will find you. A second voice came, not from a room, but from behind her. The butler, moving with his veterans quiet. He had a tray also, with a napkin folded into a triangle that meant, the next hour will change something. Everything all right, he murmured. Yes, she said. It was not a lie. Everything was all right in the way that a piano can be perfectly tuned just before the wire snaps. He moved past her, and then, noticing a scuff on the baseboard that had not existed when they bought the house, bent to rub it with a thumb and the corner of his napkin. Always the baseboards, he muttered, a joke old enough to have grandkids. He knocked and entered. The phone call continued for another minute behind the door, shaped now and then by laughter that did not ask permission to be heard. Naomi kept walking. She was not a thief of sentences. But the syllables she had already taken rearranged themselves in a drawer of her mind and spelled out a picture she refused to name yet. In the kitchen the chef tasted a sauce and frowned like a man told bad news about a minor planet. Too proud, he said and added, something that softened it. Naomi poured tea for the tutor and water for the dogs that belonged to no one but had paperwork with Mr. Rothwell's name on it. She collected the boys from their lesson. Henry wanted to show her a drawing. She looked as if it were a gallery show. He brightened the way children brighten when an adult gives their work all the way their eyes. At 7:14, the millionaire arrived. His apology was the same as all apologies where money is the one speaking, generous and late. He went straight to the private room, tie loosened, a line at the corner of his mouth that meant caution. The door closed. We are not inside that one yet. We are with Naomi across the house, listening as the day sets the table for what it will serve next. She wipes a counter that already shines and then stops because she recognizes the act as superstition. Do something with your hands, and perhaps the world will do something kinder with its own. She goes to the mudroom to collect a sweater one of the boys had convinced himself he would never need again, and then needed an hour later when the night remembered to be cold. The sweater smells like grass and boy, and the warmth that belongs to people who do not think about warmth until it is missing. She folds it. She puts it by the door. She turns back toward the main hall, and then hears a sound the house does not make, a voice raised not for anger, but for emphasis, then lowered to a blade. The private room had thick walls. The sounds that escaped were the kind that refused to be told to stay. The rhythm of a man defending something he bought with his father's fear, the soft insistence of another who expects to be obeyed because he remembers being obeyed in rooms far from here. The argument was not an argument yet. It was a dance in which both men kept their feet cool. Naomi did not know that her life had already stepped to a different music. Dinner came and went for the people who ate dinner. For the ones who served it, the evening elongated like the shadow of a building. The Sheikh emerged from a private room once, passing the hallway where Naomi stood near the pantry taking inventory, her pencil obeying columns. He lifted his eyes at exactly the angle of a man accustomed to being looked at first. His gaze moved across her, like a beam measuring a surface. He did not see a person who would change his night. He saw a woman in navy who would not speak to him unless he spoke first. He smiled without teeth. "Shukran," he said to the butler behind her, "thank you." The word brushed her skin. At 8:30 the house shifted keys. Guests arrived who had been told there was nothing to celebrate, and arrived anyway to celebrate the right to be told things early. Naomi brought coats to a room that made the coats feel dressed up. She pointed a man in the direction of the powder room who did not need the bathroom but needed to see himself in a mirror that admitted him. She replaced a candle no one would notice, and then noticed herself that it smelled like something trying to be a memory of a forest. "Naomi," Clara said from a distance that turned her name into a command. "The children are allowed one show, and then bed. We have an early morning." "Of course," Naomi said. She had already negotiated the show with the boys, 26 minutes of something that didn't teach them capitalism before they learn math. She took them to the room where screens do what windows used to, sat with them long enough to anchor their fidgeting, then stood again. Henry reached for her hand as if to tether his attention. She gave him her fingers, and then withdrew gently. "I'll be right outside," she said. "Promise?" he asked. "Promise," she said, and meant it more than most promises. Across the corridor, the private room door opened and closed again with those quiet lungs. She looked up, then away, a staff reflex. See everything, admit to seeing nothing. The Sheikh had returned to his chair. The voice on the phone was a different one now, higher, the consonants tighter, the words coming faster, as if catching a plane. Naomi opened a cabinet and checked the inventory glasses, napkins, the little spoons that pretended to be practical and were actually there to be expensive. She did not stay to listen. She finished her list, turned a page, began a second list. The boys laughed at something a cartoon dog did. The house watched itself in its shiny surfaces. When the call ended, the room released a silence that was not empty but full the way a stage is full a second before the curtain goes up. Naomi felt the fullness without swallowing it. People talk about intuition as a dazzled light bulb. Her intuition worked like a barometer. The pressure shifted. "Storm," it said, not loud but certain. At 9, the tutor left. At 9:10, Henry put his head on Naomi's shoulder and declared that sleep had tricked him. She carried him, he would deny it if asked, and tucked him into a bed that behaved like a throne when he lay in it. She kissed the top of his head, and then pretended she had not. He pretended not to notice. Ethan and Lucas did not require carrying. They require negotiation. She knew their price. 2 pages of a book, one story about when she was little, and the electricity went out, and the rain made the city smell new. She told it, her voice a blanket she spread even over herself. By 9:30 the house had become a chorus of separate rooms, each singing their own small song. In the kitchen the dishwasher spoke in water. In the hallway the art held its breath. In the private room a deal rehearsed its lines. Naomi did not know, then, that the next hour would ask more courage of her than any day that came before. She did not know that the language she had taught herself at a borrowed desk under a borrowed lamp would ring in her ears louder than any insult ever hurled under a chandelier. She did not know that a call in a tongue other people dismissed as foreign would be the rope she reached for when the floor beneath the mansion finally shifted. What she knew was this: the lemon stain from a committee woman had vanished without leaving a ghost. The boys were breathing the theatrical sleep of children who are safe without knowing they are. And the door at the end of the hall, the one she had crossed earlier with a cloth in her hand and respect in her pocket, would open again before the night was done. And when it did, the room would not be empty. Because a message, once overheard, is not a sound. It is a responsibility. And responsibilities choose their moment with precision. The Sheikh's phone lit the arm of the chair in a soft rectangle. He answered and slipped into his other voice, the one he used when he did not have to make an effort to be charming. "Iwa," he said. "Yes." Then a series of words that fell like coins into a bowl. The name of a bank that liked to think of itself as invisible. A number Naomi did not write down because she did not have a pen, and because to write would be to admit that listening had become an act. A phrase that translated itself in her mind so quickly she nearly whispered the English after it. "Signature tomorrow. contingency in place, the fool will not read. She had moved without deciding to step small, soundless, into the shadow just before the doorframe. The hallway had a draft that lifted one hair at her temple. She felt it stir and willed it back. She could see exactly as far as the corner of the desk, the lamp's column, the ring-catching light, as he gestured even though the person on the phone could not see his hand. "Naam," he said, emphatic now. "Yes, yes. Alorak Jahiza. The papers are ready. Baki al-Talki. Only the signature remains." Then a sentence built to be overheard by no one. Huwa la yufakir. Huwa yathik. He does not think. He trusts. Naomi's heart did the human thing, mistook fear for running, and tried to sprint. She placed her palm against the wall and pressed until the adrenaline found something else to do. The words threaded their way into her, not as gossip, but as coordinates. It is a strange intimacy to understand a person who believes you cannot. It makes you feel both powerful and small. Powerful because knowledge is a tool, small because tools are heavy if you are the only one lifting them. She stood there long enough to know the shape of the danger, not long enough to know its whole size. Then the house saved her from herself. Upstairs, one of the boys' dream cried, a single vowel of distress that cut through the velvet with the precision of need. She was halfway up the stairs when the private room door opened. The sound was ordinary. Tonight it meant a fuse has been lit. She reached the boys' room and found Lucas lying sideways on his pillow, hair in a fan, hand flung out in the universal gesture of someone arguing with a dragon he will not remember in the morning. She fixed the blanket he had kicked to the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and told him a story without words, the one where you put your hand on a small back and say to a nervous system, "You are not alone." By the time she returned to the hall, the Sheikh was gone from the doorway, and the house had resumed its curated calm. She could have gone to the butler and said, "I heard." She could have walked into the private room and said to the man who owned it in name only that she knew enough Arabic to recognize the sound of a trap. She did not. Not because she feared losing her job. Employment is a fragile thing in a strong body. She had learned to earn again and again. She did not because words are arrows, and you do not let them fly until you have chosen target. She needed more. She needed proof that the sentence she had constructed in her head from a handful of nouns and the cadence of a plan would stand up in the light. She needed, in a house where a lemon could stain a reputation, to be exact. So she went to the place where children stash their truths, the playroom. On the windowsill, behind the fourth book in a series about a boy who found a door in a tree, Henry kept a notebook. It was where he wrote the names of the constellations he had invented and the rules for the game that had no rules. Naomi added nothing, took nothing. She stood there and thought like a person who has trained the mind to be as obedient as the hands. Transfers, signatures, papers, tomorrow. She reached for a mental calendar. Tomorrow was Friday. The lawyers would come. The Winter Terrace would host the performance of seriousness adults play for each other when they are about to do something that will excuse the next 10 years of their lives. And somewhere in that polite theater, a man who underestimated a woman in a navy dress would attempt to remove from this family something it did not deserve and could not survive losing. Stories often begin with a letter slid under a door, a will misplaced in a drawer, an heir who arrives with a face no one can deny. This one began with a sentence in a language almost no one in the house believed belonged here. It did. It belonged because Naomi lived here, and she carried that language not on her tongue, but in her spine. By 10:15, the guests had gone. The Sheikh remained, his car idling by the lion at the foot of the steps. Mr. Rothwell walked him out, the two men doing that shoulder embrace men do when they want to say we are colleagues, and also sometimes friends. The night air took their breath and made it visible. They smiled with only half their faces. The door closed in again on its weather. Naomi returned the last glass to its shelf, folded the last napkin that people would later find and call fresh by accident. She put her own coat on and stood in the mudroom with her hand on the knob. Leaving would be the ordinary thing. She did not move. When she finally did, it was not toward the door. It was toward the hallway where the private rooms slept and toward the future that had already decided it would not wait for her to rest. Morning came dressed as apology. The mansion woke in soft light that pretended nothing monumental had shifted the night before. Staff arrived with their measured footsteps. The espresso machine cleared its throat. Somewhere outside, a gardener coaxed a hedge into compliance. Inside, tension hid the way expensive things hide beneath polish. Naomi moved through the kitchen with a concentration that steadied her hands and quieted the echo of last night's words. She cracked an egg with the familiar rhythm of someone who had learned to make 4 breakfasts while thinking about something else entirely. Henry wanted pancakes shaped like planets. Ethan wanted bacon that obeyed one law only: be crisp. Lucas declared he would eat fruit if the fruit looked like a tower. She made the tower. She built Saturn in batter. She turned bacon into a promise. Mrs. Rothwell watched from a barstool, still in a robe the color of new paper, a look on her face that made admiration resemble suspicion. "You were here late," Clara said, scrolling. "Again." "I wanted to make sure everything was set for the morning," Naomi said. "Everything is always set," Clara said. She said it like an accusation, as if competence were a kind of rudeness. Mr. Rothwell came in with the energy of a man who's already had 2 meetings in his head and one on the drive in. He kissed the crown of his wife's head without waiting for her to tilt it. He ruffled Henry's hair and forgot it would ruin the boy's carefully combed plan for school. Then he saw Naomi and, without meaning to, let a fraction of last night's fatigue show. It barely registered as a shift in his posture. She noticed it anyway. "Good morning, Naomi," he said. "Good morning," she said, and poured his coffee at the strength he always pretended was too strong and always finished. The boys argued about who would sit where. Spoons clinked. Maple syrup did its quiet alchemy. The normalcy would have won any other day. But normalcy is camouflage when a decision waits behind it. Naomi smiled when Lucas made a joke that did not quite land, and laughed anyway to reward the attempt. She packed 3 lunches the way you pack parachutes, with attention and the humility to know attention may still not be enough. By 9 the boys were out the door. By 9:10 a florist swept in like spring personified, trailing peonies and invoices. The woman chattered to the butler about a gala tonight that would draw half the city's names and half of the other half's envy. At 9:15, a courier arrived with a sealed envelope addressed to the private room and the sort of caution around paper usually reserved for surgery. At 10 sharp, the house paused. The pause had a reason. The Sheikh had returned. He arrived without ceremony, which was ceremony enough. 2 men in dark suits accompanied him, and then vanished the way shadows do when the light stands directly overhead. His cologne found the room before he did. His smile followed, a precise range that suggested familiarity without presumption. He shook Mr. Rothwell's hand with the confidence of a partner and the patience of a hunter. "Old friend," he said, and the English wore its second music again. "Old friend," Mr. Rothwell said. He tried the phrase on like a jacket that no longer fit and decided to keep it on anyway. They went to the private room. The door closed. A request to the staff followed, not spoken by either man but by the house itself: privacy. Clara trailed the air left behind by the men, eyes narrowing at a smell she did not recognize and therefore did not approve of. She turned to Naomi, whose hands were damp from rinsing, whose jaw was set like a person trying not to clench. "Do not hover near that hall," Clara said. "You know how important today is." "I do," Naomi said. "You may take the boys to the park after school," Clara added, as if dispensing a treat. "They need sun." "Yes," Naomi said. She tucked 3 apples into a bowl and arranged their stems in the same direction, then stopped herself. Perfection could become a nervous tic. Today did not need another one. The morning continued with small humiliations dressed as corrections. A guest for lunch arrived early and placed her coat on a chair Naomi had just cleaned, then apologized to the butler as if he were the one whose cloth might complain. Clara called Naomi into the dining room to adjust a glass by an inch, and then called her back to unadjust it when centerpiece decided to live taller. The florist asked if they had anyone who knew how to change water in an arrangement without disrupting its temperament, as if flowers had opinions about service. "I can do it," Naomi said, and did, and endured the gratitude that was flatter than the car it came on. We will leave those scenes quickly because attention is a currency, and today we must spend it on what matters. But understand this, humiliation is not always loud. Sometimes it is the slow erosion of dignity by 1,000 small waves. Sometimes it is being excellent at a thing people think requires none. At 11:30, the private room opened. The Sheikh came out with his expression lacquered. Mr. Rothwell followed, his mouth tight. Both men were polite with the superficial shine of people who have just agreed to something that made one of them quietly bleed. "Lunch will be served in the winter room," the butler said, already recalculating the day. "Something light," the Sheikh said. "We will need clarity this afternoon." Naomi carried plates into sunlight made thin by glass. She set water where hands would reach for it without thinking. She moved near enough to hear the texture of conversation, and far enough not to register as a participant in it. The men spoke of markets. They spoke of family, as if families were stocks that rose and fell. They spoke of timing. The Sheikh spoke of trust. "Trust is a luxury," Mr. Rothwell said. "Trust is an instrument," the Sheikh corrected. "In the right hands, it increases value. In the wrong, it destroys it." Naomi placed a dish at the precise angle that made the scoop of tuna look like the center of a compass. She wanted to take the sentence and pin it to the wall. She wanted to ask, whose hands? After lunch, the house turned itself toward evening. Staff adjusted plans for the gala. The caterers arrived through the service drive and began their ballet. Musicians did a sound check in a room that did not often permit sound to be checked. A woman who managed guest lists arrived with a laptop and a soft panic because someone whose name was always printed larger would now not be attending. Naomi watched as a choice in another part of the city rearranged expectations here. She wished consequence traveled so efficiently everywhere. The nannies worked double before a party. It doubled because parties created mess disguised as decoration, and because parties included children who were expected to be charming until 8:30 and invisible after. The boys were half excited, half allergic. They kept their jackets on because jackets made them heroic, then flung them off because jackets made their arms rude. "Can we go upstairs now?" Ethan asked, 30 minutes before his allowed time. "Not yet," Naomi said. "I will trade you. 1 round of hide and seek. Then upstairs. Then you choose 1 show." 2, he said immediately, because negotiation is a language boys learn early. 1 and the story about the rain, she countered. He considered the math and conceded. Lucas hid behind a curtain and pretended to be a lamp. Henry hid under a table and ate a grape in the dark like a thief. Naomi counted in a voice that let them hear she knew exactly where they were and loved them enough to pretend otherwise. When the boys were upstairs, Naomi returned to the ground floor. The gala had begun to assemble its face. Waiters floated. The orchestra's strings found their shimmer. Guests arrived with the kind of laughter that makes rooms feel temporary. Naomi was moving a tray of glasses when she heard her name, spoken incorrectly. "Naomi." A woman with a topknot and a camera smiled the smile people wear when they have remembered to be friendly to staff and won a prize. "Can you help me with a quote about the children's activities for the newsletter?" "I'm the nanny," Naomi said to save them both time. Exactly, the woman said undeterred. Just something sweet. The human angle. Naomi could have said anything. She could have said the boys had invented a language that used only eyebrows. She could have said they liked their sandwiches cut into hexagons because squares felt too obvious. She could have said the human angle in this house was a right angle, 90 degrees of precision, and a corner you learned to avoid. She said none of that. They learn quickly, she said instead. Perfect, the woman said, typing. And where are you from, Naomi? Here, Naomi said. Oh, the woman said, surprised to find her expectation did not fit. Lovely. Humiliation is also being asked to make the story easy to read. In the corner of the room, the Sheikh worked the crowd like a man who had been born with a crowd in his crib. He spoke to board chairs and museum patrons, to men who own small parts of large companies, and to women who orchestrate the symphony of philanthropy. He spoke to Clara as if she were the sun in a solar system he could visit, but not control. He did not speak to Naomi. He did not need to. His assumption protected him more than distance. Then the moment. It did not announce itself. It arrived like a glass placed on a coaster. The Sheikh stepped aside to take a call. He moved toward the far end of the winter room by the lemon tree, where the sound of conversation frayed just enough to make privacy feel possible. Naomi, placing a tray on a sideboard, saw his mouth change shape. It was a small change. Enough to tell her the language had changed too. She could not hear him. She did not have to. The shape of Arabic lives in the lips and the tongue and the throat. It moves differently inside the mouth. It lands on syllables like a dancer landing on the ball of the foot. Even before her ear caught a single word, her body knew. Then the air carried one to her, Bukra. Tomorrow. She steadied the tray. She did not lean closer. She counted forks the way a person counts breaths, and let sound come the distance it would. His voice was low, but rooms carry what they want. She found the edges of sentences. Numbers. An initial. A bank with a nickname. She turned the details over in her mind, and they clicked into place like gears. He ended the call and resumed the party as if he had merely stepped away to admire the lemon tree. Naomi lifted the tray and left the room before she could hate herself for needing to leave. In the hallway, she found the butler correcting a candle that had decided to lean. "Are you all right?" he asked because he had known her long enough to hear the absence of noise in her. "I think so," she said. "Think." He raised an eyebrow. "I am gathering my thoughts," she said. He nodded. "Gather fast. Tonight moves." The humiliation came later, in the form of laughter. Not cruel, not direct. The kind that floats across a room and attaches itself to the nearest possible host. Two women near the staircase told a story about a nanny who had posted a video on a platform and had been discovered because the kitchen island in the background belonged to a family with an island that had been in a magazine. They laughed with their hands covering their teeth. "Can you imagine," one said, "thinking you belong in the story?" The other did the kind of laugh that erases people. Naomi stood within earshot because it was her job to stand within earshot. She did not flush. She went colder, which in her meant clarity. She thought of the notebook on the windowsill. She thought of her mother's voice asking if she had eaten. She thought of last night's words and how the word fool sounds almost kind in Arabic until you feel its edge. We will leave that scene too because it is not new. What is new is what Naomi did next. In the kitchen, she asked the chef for a spare label, the small white rectangles he used to mark sauces. He gave her one without asking. On it, with a pencil, she wrote 3 items as if making grocery list. B al-Najm. Bukra. Taki. She did not need the full words. She needed the trigger. She tucked the label into the pocket of her apron, next to the cloth of yesterday's dust. She returned to the party. At 10, the boys went to bed. At 10:15, the music leaned toward softer. At 10:30, the Sheikh disappeared from the main room. Naomi found him without looking like she was looking. He was in the private room. The door was ajar. His back was to the hall. He was standing, phone to his ear again, one hand on the edge of the desk she had wiped. The temptation to stop was a tide. She did not fight it. She let it lift her into stillness, just at the edge of the doorframe where light could not betray her. His voice came softer now, threaded with urgency he had not shown the crowd. Iwa, Bukra, Alorak Fi al-Maktab. Tomorrow. The papers are in the office. La Kaf. No, do not worry. Then a name that rang a bell for her. Al-Najm. The Star. It was a bank, but not by that name. A code, perhaps. Or an internal shorthand. Then the phrase she needed to hear and feared. Imda Bila Kairoa. Signed without reading. He laughed softly. Huwa Yathik Bi. He trusts me. Her reaction was not dramatic. It was a single inhale that did not fully arrive. She did not shake. She did not weep. She placed her palm against the carved wood of the hall and memorized the grain under her skin. The grain would be there tomorrow. She wanted to remember a thing that would not lie to her. The call ended. He turned, and in turning he saw a shadow that could have been anyone's. He took 2 steps toward the door with the nonchalance of a man who has never been surprised in his own narrative. Naomi had already moved. She did not run. She arranged herself in the adjacent corridor in front of a console table, as if studying a floral arrangement for signs of displeasure. He passed her with a glance that weighed nothing. She let him go. Later, when the party thinned and the staff began to reset the house to resemble itself, Naomi made a small choice that changed the stakes. She went to the office where the house calendar was managed, a room adjacent to the pantry, lined with clipboards and schedules that kept delivery trucks from colliding with orchestras. The household manager's laptop slept on the desk, screen dark, a stack of tomorrow's lists next to it. Naomi did not touch the computer. She did not need to. The printed calendar lay under the lists. She slid it out as if it were a tray. She scanned for Friday. The list of events was predictable. Cleaning rotation for the East Wing, the 3rd grade carpool, the piano tuner at 2, the family lawyer at 4:30 on the terrace. No mention of the Sheikh. No mention of papers. She replaced the calendar exactly as she had found it and returned to the main hall with a fact like a match in her pocket. If the meeting was not on the household calendar, it meant the meeting was meant to pass around the house, not through it. If the lawyer came, it would look ordinary. If the signature happened, it would look inevitable. And if the warning came from her, it would look like disobedience. We arrive now at the spine of Act 2, the backstory that taught Naomi how to carry secrets without letting them rot. When she first learned Arabic, it was not because of a man. It was because of a book. She had found a copy of a translation in a library that smelled like rain and dust, a poetry collection where the words curved in a script that looked like music to someone who could not read it. She began with transliteration, then with a cheap app, then with a night course in a community center where the teacher had fled a country that did not deserve him and moved his love for language into a fluorescent room with folding chairs. She learned the letters slowly, a new alphabet that asked her to write right to left as if to remind her that not all progress goes in the same direction. She was good at it, not showy, good the way a person is good at listening. She worked double shifts and still showed up to sound out verbs that changed with their subjects. She practiced in the early mornings before trains started talking. She memorized phrases on the subway and whispered them into her scarf so no one would stare. She learned to hear the difference between a calf and a cough, between a sod and a scene. She learned to love the way the words carried history inside them. Then life did the thing life does to people who hope. It placed an emergency between her and her plan. Her mother got sick. A job changed hours. The cost of the course rose by $10. $10 can be a hill if you live in a valley. She paused, promising herself she would step back onto the road. She did, years later, but by then the study was private. She kept it because it felt like independence. She kept it because it did not belong to the house. She kept it because knowing a language no one expected of her gave her a sense of expansion in a world that was constantly asking her to shrink. Tonight, that private consolation turned into a public responsibility. Back in the winter room, Clara called for Naomi with the tone of a woman who has lost something that can be found only by someone who knows where she misplaces things. "My bracelet," Clara said, tapping her wrist as if the jewelry might answer. "It is always here. It is not here." Naomi could have said you removed it in the powder room to wash your hands and set it on the marble edge because it flashed too brightly under the light. She could have said the maid retrieved it and placed it in the small dish by the sink, slightly to the left of the soap. She said none of that. She went to the powder room, retrieved the bracelet, and returned it with the sort of politeness that erases both error and rescue. "You are a wonder," Clara said, sincerity passing over her face like cloud over water. The compliment cost her nothing. It gave Naomi less. The party ended. The house exhaled. The Sheikh took his leave with the grace of a man who knows he will be welcomed again whether or not he deserves it. Mr. Rothwell watched the car glide down the drive and stood in the doorway longer than weather required, his silhouette trying to decide if it belonged anywhere. In the quiet that followed, Naomi made a decision that would pull Act 3 into motion. She did not sleep. She called her mother and listened to her talk about a neighbor's grandchild and the price of tomatoes. She answered honestly when asked if she was tired. She did not mention the Sheikh. She did not mention the word tomorrow. She hung up and sat on the small bed in the room over the garage the family called the carriage suite, though it was a rectangle with a radiator that clicked in winter. She took out the label from her apron and traced the letters she had written with the point of a nail. "B. al-Najm. Bukra. Taki." She said the words aloud, quietly, each one landing in the room like a pebble in a bowl of water. Then she wrote more on the back, in English this time, for the purpose of clarity, if fear tried to steal her memory. Signature: Terrace. Lawyer. For 30. She was not a detective. She did not have a badge. She had her mind and her courage and a household's calendar. She decided to do what she could with that. She could make sure the children were not on the terrace at 4. She could make sure the household manager reminded the butler that the piano tuner was sometimes late, so the terrace chairs would need shifting again at 3:45, which might mean the butler would be present at 4:30 in a way that made him see names on papers. She could also do the riskiest thing, position herself near enough to the terrace to hear a sentence, and decide if she would let it fall to the ground or catch it and throw it back. Before dawn, she slept for 1 hour. In that hour, she dreamed of letters that turned into birds and flew out of her hands. Morning came again, with its pretending. The boys were loud, and then laughing. Coffee did its work. Clara chose a dress. Mr. Rothwell selected a tie with a confidence that looked like courage and was actually habit. The day progressed toward the moment as if the house had been built for it. At 3, the piano tuner arrived. He had a sadness in his shoulders that had nothing to do with the instrument. He tuned with reverence. At 3:45, Naomi asked the butler if the terrace furniture should be recentered for the lawyer's meeting, because the sun had moved and would now stripe the table oddly. He thanked her in the way a man thanks a colleague who knows the craft. At 4, she took the boys to the park with a backpack containing snacks, a first aid kit, and a knot in her stomach. She sat on a bench where the wind could not make her second-guess herself and watched the boys invent a game that involved throwing a pine cone and then arguing about who had invented throwing. She checked the time 3 times, then stopped because looking would not change it. At 4:25, they returned because the boys were thirsty and because she could not pretend the park would shield her from this choice. She sent them upstairs with a promise of lemonade and set the glasses on the counter where they would find them. Then she moved toward the terrace with the confidence of a person who belongs where she is. On the terrace, the lawyer waited with a gentle, expensive pen, and the face of a man who had been told both that this would be simple and that it was not his job to be sure. Mr. Rothwell stood at the table, shoulders squared because squares pretend to be strong. The Sheikh stood like a man who had found a way to rest even while standing. "Shall we?" the lawyer said. "Shall we?" the Sheikh echoed, smiling at his reflection in the window. The papers were set down. The pen was uncapped. The wind moved the leaves as if sign language were being translated for anyone willing to look. Naomi inhaled and felt the inhale move through her like a tide. She did not know how many words she would need. She hoped fewer would be stronger. She did not wish to embarrass a man in his own home. But a home without truth is a hotel. She stepped forward until they could not pretend not to see her. 3 heads lifted. The lawyer's gaze landed first, curious. Mr. Rothwell's followed, a reflex that tried to be anger and lost its way. The Sheikh's arrived last. His eyes did not recognize her because his story did not include her. "Mr. Rothwell," she said, her voice even, "I am sorry to intrude. I know this is your private business, but I believe there is a detail you should read before you sign." Silence did what it always does at the edge of a precipice. It made everything else loud, the cloth over the table breathing in the breeze, the typing of a sparrow's feet on the railing, the distant note of the piano as the tuner tested a chord. The Sheikh smiled, a soft apology poised to turn sharp. "This is family business," he said. "I know," Naomi said. "That is why I am speaking." Mr. Rothwell's mouth found anger now. "Naomi," he said, warning and disbelief pinched into 2 syllables. "This is not." She did not look at him while he was angry. She looked at the paper. She took 1 step closer and pointed to a clause halfway down the page, a clause the lawyer had read and accepted because it was phrased like a courtesy. The clause that named a bank by an internal code. The clause that bundled assets in a way that would be untangled only after signatures cemented trust into the wrong hands. "If you read this line," she said steady, "you will see the assets do not rest in your control, after all. They rest with Al-Najm. The language implies a temporary structure. It is not. It is a transfer." The lawyer blinked. He bent. His pen hovered, then retreated. He read. He adjusted his glasses and read again. His expression shifted the way maps shift when borders are redrawn. "I do not understand," Mr. Rothwell said, refusing panic the way a proud man refuses a coat. "What are you talking about?" "The code name here," Naomi said, nodding to the clause, "is not a department. It is a bank that calls itself by a star when it wants to be someone else." The Sheikh spoke before the lawyer could. His voice had lost its friendly second music. It was steel now. "Who are you to comment on contracts?" he said. "I am the person who understands a language in which you have been conducting your side of this agreement," Naomi said, meeting his eyes for the first time. "And I am the person who remembers what trust is supposed to do." There are moments when a life stands up. This was one. The lawyer cleared his throat. "With respect," he said to Mr. Rothwell, "I would advise we pause. I will need to review this clause in context with the term sheet and the custodial agreement. The language is ambiguous, which is to say it is not, but it pretends to be. I should have asked. I apologize." Mr. Rothwell looked at the paper as if it had betrayed him personally. He looked at the Sheikh with a confusion that contained the outline of rage. He looked at Naomi last, as if she had arrived in a dream where the furniture rearranged itself to make room for her. "You understand Arabic," he said, not a question, more a recalibration. "Yes," Naomi said. "Since when?" "Since before this house knew my name." The Sheikh tried to laugh and found his mouth unwilling. "This is absurd," he said. "A nanny interrupts a legal signing because she thinks she overheard a word at a party." Naomi did not rise to it. "I think," she said, "you should ask your own lawyer to explain why the signature line on page 2 routes value to an entity that does not appear as a signatory." Silence again. The lawyer flipped. His pen found page 2, then found the margin. He made a mark that looked like regret. Mr. Rothwell straightened. He was a man who had paid a lot of money to be the kind who straightens and fixes everything by will. "We will reconvene," he said, voice cut short the way ropes are cut clean. "This meeting is over." The Sheikh did not move at first. He had not planned for this narrative. His face remained smooth, but his hand tightened on the chair back until 2 tendons climbed the skin. "As you wish," he said finally. "We will discuss again in private, as serious men do." He left the terrace with a grace that held. The lawyer packed the papers like a paramedic, saving what he could. Mr. Rothwell stood and did not thank Naomi. Gratitude would have been too much to ask of him in a second that required him to accept he had not been as careful as he had always believed. He looked at her as if trying to locate the new coordinates on a map that had mislabeled her country. Then he nodded once. It was not enough. It was honest. "Thank you," he said, and the words sounded like something he had not used in years for anything other than a tip. In the hall outside the terrace, humiliation tried one last trick. Clara stood with her hand on the doorframe, having heard only the end of the scene. Her expression carried 3 things at once: fear for the optics, anger at the inconvenience, and the reluctance to credit help when it comes in a form you do not like. "What did you do?" she said to Naomi flat. "I asked him to read," Naomi said. Clara's mouth pressed into a line. "We will discuss your boundaries," she said. "We will discuss his." Naomi replied before she could stop herself. The butler appeared, as if conjured by the need for a temperature reset. His eyes met Naomi's for a fraction of a second, and in them she saw what she needed to keep going: respect. The old, quiet kind that does not require flowers. Act 2 does not end with applause. It ends with a hallway that has just learned a new echo. It ends with a nanny who has just become visible in a house that prefers its help invisible. It ends with 2 men in separate cars making phone calls that will determine whether Act 3 takes place in a courtroom, a hospital, or a boardroom. It ends with a woman upstairs whispering to herself that her life is not a corridor. And it ends with Naomi walking to the playroom windowsill, lifting the 4th book, and sliding her small label out to add 1 more word on the back. Proof. She would need it. The terrace confrontation did not vanish with the night. Its echo threaded through the marble halls long after the guests had gone, long after the papers were locked away, long after the Sheikh's car disappeared into the kind of silence that pretends to be normal. The mansion had hosted galas, scandals, negotiations that rattled boardrooms, but it had not yet hosted a moment where its own staff rearranged destiny. Naomi felt that echo most keenly in the spaces where silence usually protected her. The kitchen, where her hands moved automatically through rinsing, chopping, wiping, all now carried a strange weight, as though every drawer and cabinet had been marked by invisible chalk. She spoke out here. The laundry hummed, yet the machine's steady rhythm only reminded her that no rhythm in this house would ever be the same again. The boys sensed it too. Children are barometers for tension adults pretend to disguise. Henry asked more questions than usual at breakfast. Ethan, usually bold, looked twice at his father before asking for seconds. Lucas tugged at Naomi's sleeve when she poured juice, whispering, "Are you in trouble?" She smoothed his hair and smiled, but he didn't believe her. Upstairs, Clara paced her dressing room with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice wasn't raised, but the crispness of each syllable was sharper than any shout. She was explaining, not to a friend but to a peer, that boundaries must be reinforced and staff must remember their place. Naomi caught fragments only because the house carried them down the stairs like dust motes in light. When Clara descended, her gaze on Naomi was gloved but still cold. "About last night," she began. Naomi paused with the tray she was arranging, posture respectful but steady. "Yes, ma'am." "You embarrassed your employer in front of a guest," Clara said. Whatever your intentions, you crossed a line. This house functions because lines exist. When they're ignored, everything collapses. Naomi's voice remained calm. I saw something that would have harmed him. You saw something that was not yours to see, Clara countered. That is the difference. Mr. Rothwell entered at that moment, his tie half knotted, his face carved by fatigue. He glanced between the two women, as though stepping into a conversation he didn't know had started. Clara, swift as a blade, turned to him. We need to discuss her future here. Naomi lowered her eyes, not in shame but in recognition. Her future was always a subject in this house, just rarely in her presence. Mr. Rothwell cleared his throat, adjusted his cufflinks, and said only, "We'll talk later." But his gaze lingered on Naomi for a second longer than it should have, as if he were seeing her differently now, though he hadn't decided if differently meant better or worse. The butler, standing discreetly near the door, caught Naomi's glance. His expression carried no theatrics, only the steadiness of a man who had survived many storms inside walls like these. He gave the smallest nod, enough to remind her she was not entirely alone. That afternoon, whispers ran through the staff quarters. The chef muttered while slicing herbs, "You save him, and they call it embarrassment." The housekeeper, older, cautious, shook her head. "Careful. Houses like this don't reward heroes. They erase them." Naomi listened, silent, folding napkins into neat halves. She knew both were right. The Sheikh had not left the city. His presence lingered like cologne too strong for the room. Rumors swirled. He had been seen dining with two bankers, his laughter loud enough to reach the next table. He had called Rothwell that morning, insisting the contract would resume, that misunderstandings were inevitable in business. The words misunderstanding and trust carried new edges now. Naomi overheard Mr. Rothwell on the phone later, his voice low but brittle. "Of course, we'll meet again. Yes, in the private room. Tonight. We'll clear this up." His tone was strained, as if trying to convince himself as much as the Sheikh. When he hung up, he noticed Naomi nearby, collecting glasses. Their eyes met. She expected dismissal, perhaps anger. Instead, he asked almost softly, "How long have you known Arabic?" "Years," Naomi said. "Since before I worked here." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "No one ever asked," she replied. And because she couldn't stop herself, she added, "Sometimes knowing something others don't is the only power you have." He looked at her for a long second, then turned away, without a word. Clara wasn't finished. That evening, as Naomi tucked the boys into bed, Clara appeared in the doorway, like a figure carved from glass. She waited until the children's breathing softened before speaking. "You've unsettled this household," she said. "My husband may not say it, tried to regain control. Naomi, this is not your place." "It is," she said firmly, surprising even herself. "Because I understand every word he just said. He is asking you to sign without reading. He is mocking your trust." The room froze. The chandelier above them hummed faintly, as if holding its breath. The Sheikh's smile faltered, then sharpened. "So the servant plays interpreter now? How convenient." Naomi didn't flinch. She repeated his Arabic back to him, word for word, then translated each phrase into English, her voice steady. "Bukra. Imda bila kaira. Tomorrow. Sign without reading." Rothwell's face drained of color. The Sheikh's composure cracked, a shadow of fury slipping through. Naomi stood taller. "You thought no one here could understand you. But I can, and I won't let you destroy this family." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Rothwell looked between the two of them, realization dawning, shame blooming alongside relief. The private room, once a sanctuary of secrets, had become the stage for truth. The silence inside the private room pressed against the walls like an uninvited guest. Naomi stood where no one like her was ever meant to stand in the circle of power, between a millionaire and a sheikh. Her presence an offense to tradition, her words an unexpected fracture in their scheme. Rothwell's jaw clenched, his hands tightening on the back of a leather chair. He looked at Naomi as if she were a stranger. Perhaps she was, perhaps he was only now meeting the real woman behind the uniform. The sheikh broke the stillness first, his laughter soft and poisonous. "Do you know what this is?" he asked Rothwell, gesturing toward Naomi. "This is theater. A servant rehearsing lines she doesn't understand, pretending to translate. Do you build your empire on the ramblings of nannies?" Naomi inhaled slowly, steadying her voice. "I understand more than you realize. You called him a fool. You said the papers are ready. You said only the signature is missing." She locked eyes with the sheikh. "I may wear an apron, but my ears are sharper than your lies." Rothwell turned to the sheikh, searching for denial, for some explanation that might restore balance. The sheikh shrugged, his ring flashing in the lamplight. "She misunderstands. Arabic is a complex tongue. Perhaps she studied a phrase book, enough to catch a word or two. Hardly reason to derail millions in business." Naomi stepped forward, her courage gathering like storm clouds. "Not a phrase book. Years of study. Enough to know the difference between Naam and Iwa, between Thika and Gaba. Trust and foolishness. You used both in the same breath." The butler had entered quietly, sensing the storm. He stopped near the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his presence grounding. Rothwell glanced at him, then back at Naomi, the conflict in his eyes flickering like candlelight in wind. The sheik's mask slipped, irritation leaking through. Even if she does know the words, she cannot know the context. Business is context. A contract is never what it seems to the untrained. Naomi replied with a calm she did not know she possessed. "Then let us read the context." She pointed to the documents on the desk. "Here. This clause, the one buried under polite language. Al-Najm. Not a department, not a division. A bank hidden behind a star. You intend to move his assets where he will never touch them again." The lawyer, who had arrived moments earlier and lingered at the edge of a room, now stepped closer. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the clause Naomi indicated. His brow furrowed. "She's correct," he said reluctantly. "This line is ambiguous. It appears to redirect custodial authority. Not immediately visible, but—" He trailed off, suddenly wary. Rothwell's face darkened. "You knew," he said to the sheikh, his voice low, dangerous. "You came into my house, into this room, and you thought I wouldn't catch you." The sheikh's composure cracked fully now. His charm evaporated. "I offered you trust. You invited me here. And you let your nanny, your help, mock me in my own language? Do you know what that means in my world?" Naomi didn't hesitate. "It means you underestimated me. And you underestimated him. That's why you will fail." The chandelier above them trembled faintly, as if the house itself had drawn in breath. The butler cleared his throat softly, a dignified punctuation. The lawyer stepped back, already imagining the fallout. Rothwell's anger swelled, but wasn't aimed at Naomi. For once, it was aimed where it belonged. He slammed his palm against the desk, making the pens in their tray leap. "This meeting is over," he declared, voice sharp as steel. The sheikh stared at him, then at Naomi, his eyes narrowing into a promise of future reckoning. Slowly, deliberately, he gathered his phone and papers, sliding them into his case. He straightened, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You will regret this," he said softly, first in English, then again in Arabic, as if hoping Naomi would flinch. She didn't. She answered him in Arabic, her voice unwavering. "La antaladi sayandam. No, you are the one who will regret." The butler's eyes flickered, a subtle spark of pride. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, clearly shaken, but unwilling to contradict. Rothwell remained still, shoulders taut, his pride wrestling with gratitude. The Sheikh left the private room with a heavy silence in his wake, the door closing like the final note of a dirge. For a long moment no one spoke. Naomi's heart pounded, but her face remained composed. She waited, ready for dismissal, ready for anger, ready for the weight of consequences. Instead, Rothwell's voice came, low but unmistakable. "You saved me. Again." Naomi bowed her head slightly. "I only did what was right." Clara appeared in the doorway then, drawn by the noise. She looked from Naomi to her husband, to the empty space where the Sheikh had stood. Her expression twisted between disbelief and indignation. What has she done now? Rothwell met his wife's eyes, his voice firm. "She's the reason we're not bankrupt." Clara scoffed, but Rothwell cut her off with a raised hand. For once, he didn't let her reshape the narrative. Naomi stepped back toward the door, but the butler moved first, opening it for her with a small nod of respect. She walked out of the private room, her head held high. For the first time, she wasn't just the invisible nanny moving through corridors. She was the woman who had stood in the forbidden room and spoken truth in the language of betrayal. Behind her, the millionaire sat in silence, the lawyer whispering explanations, Clara fuming, and the butler straightening the papers on the desk. The room had changed. The house had changed. Naomi had changed. The private room had fallen quiet again, but the silence was different now. It wasn't the curated hush of wealth. It was a silence that had been shaken, a silence still carrying the tremor of Naomi's words. The chandelier still glowed, the bookshelves still lined the walls, but the air no longer belonged to Mr. Rothwell alone. It bore her imprint too, the quiet courage of someone who had spoken when no one else dared. When Naomi stepped out into the hallway, she carried herself with composure, but her heart was beating like a drum. The butler closed the door gently behind her, his eyes catching hers for a moment. He didn't speak, but in the brief incline of his head, she read something she had never seen before in this house: acknowledgement. Downstairs, the staff had begun clearing away the remnants of the evening, but their eyes lifted as she passed. The chef, polishing his knives, paused mid-motion. The housekeeper folded a napkin too slowly, watching her. Even the driver, leaning against the wall with his cap in hand, looked at her with curiosity. Whispers had already spread. The nanny had stood in the private room and challenged the Sheikh. But in the drawing room, Clara waited. She stood near the fire, her posture sharp, her drink untouched on the mantel. The sound of Naomi's steps drew her gaze, and the look in her eyes was ice on glass. "You," Clara said, her voice thin but laced with venom, "have overstepped for the last time." Naomi clasped her hands in front of her, calm. "I did what was necessary." "What was necessary," Clara snapped, "was to remember your place. You think because you speak a language no one asked you to speak, that makes you what? Important. Indispensable." Her laughter was bitter. "This house does not revolve around you." Naomi didn't flinch. "No, but tonight it didn't collapse because of me." Clara's jaw tightened. For a moment, words failed her. Then she said the thing she had been holding back: "I want you gone. Tomorrow." The words were heavy, but Naomi had expected them. She lowered her gaze slightly, not in defeat, but in composure. "That isn't your husband's decision to make." Clara's lips curved into a brittle smile. "Oh, don't fool yourself. He may hesitate, but he will agree. Men always do." The conversation ended there, but the fire of it lingered as Naomi returned to the staff wing. She sat on the edge of her small bed above the garage, the hum of the radiator in her ears. She thought of her mother's voice, of long nights studying Arabic under borrowed light, of the boys' laughter echoing down the halls. She thought of every humiliation she had swallowed in this house, every correction, every time she had been made invisible. And she wondered if tomorrow would mean starting over, again. The next morning, breakfast was a performance. Rothwell read his paper, his face neutral, as though the world hadn't almost ended the night before. Clara was radiant in silk, her smile brighter than her words. The boys, sensing the tension, were unusually quiet. Naomi moved among them with steady hands, pouring juice, buttering toast, listening to the silence stretch between the adults. Finally, Rothwell folded his paper and looked at her. "Naomi," he said. She stopped, tray in hand. "Yes, sir." His voice was measured. "We'll need to discuss your future here." The boys froze. Henry's spoon hovered over his cereal. Ethan's eyes darted to Naomi's face. Lucas whispered, "What does that mean?" Naomi forced a gentle smile at the children. "It means grown-ups are talking, sweetheart. Eat your breakfast." But inside, her stomach tightened. By late morning, the whispers among the staff had turned into open discussions. "She'll be dismissed," one footman said. "No family tolerates being embarrassed like that." The chef shook his head. "She saved the millions. If they send her away, it's because pride weighs more than fortune." The butler, polishing silver, spoke softly but firmly. "Sometimes it does." Naomi kept working. She scrubbed, folded, arranged, but every motion was haunted by uncertainty. Should she pack her things? Should she wait? She had lived long enough in service to know the precariousness of employment, how a single word from an employer could unravel years of loyalty. And yet, for the first time, she felt something deeper. She had spoken truth. Even if they dismissed her, they could not erase that. That afternoon, the family convened in the library. Clara sat like a queen on her throne, Rothwell pacing, the boys fidgeting on the couch. Naomi stood near the door, her apron neat, her hair pulled back, waiting for judgment. Clara began. "It's simple. She has to go. Her presence is disruptive." "Disruptive?" Rothwell shot back. "She prevented me from being defrauded." "She humiliated you," Clara said sharply, "in front of a guest who holds influence in half the city. Do you think he won't tell that story, twist it to his advantage? Do you think people won't laugh behind your back because your nanny corrected your contract?" "She was right," Rothwell said. His voice rose, surprising even himself. "She was right, Clara. And if I had signed that paper, we would have been finished. Do you understand? Finished." The boys watched, wide-eyed, their heads swiveling between their parents. Finally, Henry stood, his voice breaking the tension with the raw honesty only a child could summon. "If she leaves, we leave." Clara blinked. "Excuse me." Henry's face flushed, but he pressed on. "Naomi is the only one who listens. She takes care of us. She's family." Ethan and Lucas nodded, their small voices chiming in agreement. Rothwell froze, the weight of his son's words settling heavier than Clara's arguments. Clara scoffed. "They're children. They don't understand." But Rothwell did. He looked at Naomi, and for the first time, he didn't see just the nanny. He saw the anchor holding his household together. The moment broke when the lawyer arrived, summoned for another discussion about the contract. His face was pale, his briefcase heavy with papers. "The Sheikh is not finished," he warned. "He's threatening litigation. He claims defamation, interference, breach of trust. If he pursues this, it could mean years in court." Naomi's breath caught. She had expected anger, dismissal, even gratitude. But she hadn't expected the Sheikh's shadow to stretch further. Rothwell pinched the bridge of his nose. "Of course he isn't finished." The lawyer lowered his voice. He asked for another meeting. In the private room. Tonight. The words sank like stones. Clara seized on them instantly. There. Proof. She made things worse. But Rothwell's gaze was locked on Naomi. For once, the choice wasn't about contracts or image or pride. It was about trust. That evening, as the house settled into the strange calm that comes before storms, Naomi walked the halls in silence. She touched the banister polished by countless hands, paused at the playroom where the boys had hidden under curtains and laughed until they hiccuped, and stood outside the private room, its door closed, its secrets waiting. She wondered if she should leave before morning. She could walk out now into the night, free of marble and chandeliers, free of humiliation and impossible hierarchies. But she also knew this house was not done with her, and she was not done with it. The choice crystallized when Henry appeared in the hall, clutching his notebook of constellations. He handed it to her silently. On the page, in his uneven scrawl, he had written, "Don't go." Naomi closed her eyes, the weight of his trust anchoring her. Whatever happened next, she would stay. Because truth once spoken demands you see it through. The night fell heavy, draping the mansion in shadows deeper than usual. Naomi felt the weight of it pressing against the windows, seeping into the halls. The private room at the end of the corridor glowed faintly, its door closed but its presence undeniable, like a heart that beat too loudly for the rest of the house to ignore. Inside, Mr. Rothwell sat hunched at his desk, a whiskey untouched at his elbow, documents spread before him. The lawyer paced, muttering about injunctions, precedents, the years and millions a trial could devour. The butler lingered silently near the door, hands folded behind his back. And Clara, radiant in her evening gown, stood like a sentinel of pride, her lips curved into the brittle smile she wore whenever dignity outweighed truth. The knock came soft but certain. The Sheikh entered. He carried himself as if the earlier humiliation had never occurred, his rings gleaming, his voice smooth. "We meet again," he said, settling into the velvet chair, without waiting to be asked. "Is good you came to your senses. We can resolve this quietly, without the noise of courts." Naomi stood in the hallway, unseen. She had not been invited, but she knew in the marrow of her bones that the room would call her again. Inside, the Sheikh spread papers across the desk. "You sign, we move forward. The terms are unchanged, though. Perhaps a little softened for your comfort." His smile was polished steel. Rothwell stared, jaw tight. "I won't sign anything I don't understand." "Then let me help you understand," the Sheikh said, his tone dipped in condescension. He leaned closer, voice dropping into Arabic as if to wrap his true meaning in silk only he could feel. "La taklak. Sayawaju al-Qadi mushkalat, lays anta. Don't worry. The judge will face the problem, not you." The lawyer blinked, lost. Rothwell frowned, clueless. Clara, impatient, waved a hand. "This is nonsense. Just translate, man." But no one in that room could. Naomi stepped forward. Her footsteps were quiet, but her resolve made them sound like thunder in her chest. She pushed the door open and entered. The Sheikh stiffened, his words halting mid-sentence. His eyes narrowed, fury flickering behind the calm mask. "Not again." Rothwell's head snapped up. "Naomi." But she was already moving, already speaking. "He just told you not to worry. That when the matter reaches a judge, the judge will face the problem. Not you." The Sheikh rose to his feet. "You twist." "No," Naomi said, her voice sharp as glass. "I repeat, asterisk la taklak. Sayawaju al-Qadi mushkalat, lays anta. Asterisk you underestimate me because of the uniform I wear. But every word you use is another blade I can catch before it strikes." The room froze. Rothwell's eyes locked on her, comprehension dawning. Clara's lips parted in disbelief, but no words came. The lawyer scribbled furiously, finally seeing what was hidden in plain sight. The Sheikh's composure broke entirely. His voice rose, venom dripping from each word. "You dare stand in this room? You dare correct me in front of him? You are nothing." Naomi met his fury with calm. "If being nothing means saving this family from ruin, then I accept it. But I will not be silent while you rob him blind." She reached for the documents, flipping them open to the buried clause she had already seen. Her finger traced the lines as she read aloud, first in Arabic, then in English. Each word landed like a hammer. This does not transfer assets for investment. It transfers control. Permanently. The lawyer's face blanched. She's right. This would strip you of ownership. Rothwell's hand slammed onto the desk. The sound reverberated through the room. "Get out," he said to the Sheikh. The Sheikh sneered. "You believe her? A servant? This will destroy you." Rothwell's voice thundered. "The only one who nearly destroyed me was you." For the first time, Rothwell turned toward Naomi fully, his eyes not just seeing her, but acknowledging her. "And the only reason I still stand is because of her." Clara gasped softly, as though the words were daggers aimed at her pride. The butler, silent, allowed the faintest ghost of a smile. The Sheikh gathered his papers with shaking hands, rage distorting his polished mask. He hissed something in Arabic under his breath, a curse meant to sting, but Naomi answered him in the same tongue, her voice steady, her translation sharp. "You call me a shadow, but even shadows prove there is light." The Sheikh faltered, then stormed out, the door slamming behind him like a final defeat. The silence that followed was different than all the silences before. It was not heavy with fear. It was not tense with humiliation. It was the silence that follows a storm fragile, waiting to see what remains standing. Rothwell sank into his chair, running a hand across his face. He looked at Naomi, his voice rough with honesty. "I don't know how to thank you." Naomi clasped her hands before her, steady. "Respect is thanks enough." Clara spoke at last, her voice brittle. "We cannot pretend this is normal. She is staff." Rothwell cut her off, his tone firm. "She is the reason we still have anything to protect. That makes her more than staff. That makes her family." The boys, who had been hovering in the hall, rushed in then, unable to restrain themselves. They clung to Naomi, their voices overlapping. "We told you she's family." Henry shouted. "She saved us." Ethan added. Lucas, smallest, whispered fiercely, "Don't let her go." Tears stung Naomi's eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. She knelt, holding the children close, their trust wrapping around her like a mantle more valuable than silk or jewels. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Rothwell, with her testimony, with her translations, we can dismantle the Sheikh's claims before they reach a courtroom. She's not only protected your fortune, she may have protected your legacy." Rothwell nodded slowly, the truth settling in. He looked at Naomi once more, his voice steady. "You changed everything, and I'll never forget it." Clara turned away, her pride too rigid to bend, but even she could not undo what had been done. That night, when the house finally quieted, Naomi stood alone in the hallway outside the private room. She touched the polished wood of the door, feeling its weight, its history. Once, it had been a place forbidden to her. Now, it was the place where she had found her voice. She did not smile, but a calm strength filled her chest. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer the help. She was the woman who had stepped into the heart of power and spoken truth. The narrator's voice closed softly over the image, a reflection meant for every ear listening. Wealth builds walls. Pride builds doors that only the powerful are meant to pass through. But dignity needs no permission. Tonight, one woman proved that integrity speaks louder than gold, and respect cannot be bought, only earned. Remember this, courage can come from the most unexpected places. Even from a nanny in a house that never saw her until she saved it. The camera would fade on Naomi walking away from the private room, the children's laughter faint in the distance, the mansion forever changed because one voice refused to be silent.